Hi, I'm Malika Bilal in for Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today in Guatemala, mass protests on the street and a president in crisis. We'll take a look at what lies ahead for the country, and to do that, our digital producer Omar Madar is here looking out for your live feedback and following this story online. What are you seeing?
We're seeing a lot. I mean, just the hashtags that are related to this protest movement are just exploding. So we have the hashtag Yo no tengo presidente, which means I have no president. That has more than 20,000 uses this week so far. But the biggest one altogether is Renuncia ya, which means step down. That has been used more than 200,000 times since the scandal broke back in April. And then today with fresh protests, we have Paro 27A, which means strike on August 27th. Now get this is getting thousands of uses every single hour. So folks at home, if you want to join this conversation, tweet us using the hashtag AJStream, and we'll try to get to those tweets during the show.
I'm Ralph Dela Cruz, a writer and former journalist, and I'm in the stream.
Political scandal erupted in April when the UN's International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala accused one of the vice president's top aides of involvement in a bribery scheme dubbed La Línea. Since then, several cabinet ministers and officials have left their posts. The Supreme Court has taken a first step towards impeachment of the president, and the former vice president has been ordered to stand trial. In the streets and online, thousands of protesters continue to call for President Otto Perez Molina's resignation. He has apologized that the graft took place on his watch, but he's firm that he will not step down. Pressure is mounting on him. Late Wednesday, the Attorney General's office said the president should submit his resignation to prevent ungovernability, and strikes continued on Thursday. We're joined by Andrea Ishu, an activist, to discuss this on the phone. But meanwhile, elections are only weeks away. So, Andrea, I'm happy to have you on the phone. I know that you were at the protest, which is why you are on the phone with us. I want to start here on my laptop with this picture. This is a picture of people rallying in Guatemala, clearly calling on the president to resign. Andrea, what's the atmosphere like where you are?
Well, hello. It's nice to be with you. Thanks for the invitation. Well, Guatemala is having a big strike today. People from all around the country protesting against President Otto Perez Molina and want his resignation from his presidential post. So we are having hard and interesting times right now. We have more than 100,000 people marching on the streets. University people, people that work in labor, people from churches, people from elementary schools, every kind of people, all the neighbors, all the villages have been traveling since yesterday to Guatemala City to do this huge protest today.
Oh, also joining Andrea, who just gave us that report live, is Alan Nairn, a journalist who has covered Guatemala since the 1980s. Arturo Matute is an analyst with the International Crisis Group, and Ramon Cadena is a human rights lawyer and director of the International Commission of Jurists Office for Central America. Welcome, all of you, to the stream. Arturo, you heard Andrea there describe the atmosphere, but explain to us what it is that protesters are demanding.
Really, this goes beyond just going against one president. This is really an opportunity of people coming together to overcome a legacy of impunity, of weak rule of law, and crippled political parties in Guatemala that has marked our history.
So just to give you a sense of what things look like, if you take a look at my computer over here, these are vines under the hashtag Paro 27A. There are a lot of videos that are being shared right now about the protests that are currently taking place. But we also have Mike over here who says corruption must be stopped. People die in hospitals because of the money that is stolen by politicians. I'm actually curious about this. Ramon, what exactly is the impact of this corruption that has brought so many people out to the streets? How is it actually impacting people in Guatemala?
Well, it will depend on the results of the judicial cases. And of course, people are united in the fight against corruption, but I think that not all are in the same stream regarding other issues and other rights. I think that the impact will be extremely important. We have to see the results of the cases, but one of the positive issues is that all the people has now been united around the fight against corruption. And I think that will impact in the future when another president or other government or other political parties get into power.
So united against corruption, but united in a call for what?
Yes, united in a call for right now a fight against corruption. The people are requesting the president to leave the office, and of course that the judicial systems should respond to these corruption cases. But we have to see the final results of all these demonstrations because, of course, the unity is only around the fight of corruption. I was just 2 hours ago also in Zone 1, and we were in front of the Constitutional Court, and there the claim was not only corruption, but also justice for people who are not facing the big mega projects and the utilization and exploitation of natural resources. So I think that if you would be at the park, you could hear a lot of messages, different messages. But there is one message that you can hear in different groups, which is the president should go and we have to fight against corruption.
Well, Alan, you heard there the fight against corruption, also a call for the president to resign. Just this week, as we showed at the very top of the show, and I'll pull up here on my computer, just this week, Wednesday, in fact, we saw that call come from the Attorney General office urging the president to step down. How realistic is this demand, and does the president have any support left?
His highest profile support now is from the U.S. Embassy, which wants to prop him up. The issue goes way beyond corruption. This corruption is possible because this is a government and a ruling order that was built on mass murder. It was built on the corpses of more than 100,000 people, mainly indigenous Mayans who were massacred by the army, mainly during the 1980s. And General Perez Molina, who is now the president, personally carried out some of those massacres under the orders of General Rios Montt. I met Perez Molina in the mountains in the East Shield Triangle in 1982 as he was doing these massacres. His soldiers described how they would sweep into villages, drag people to the village square, make them dig their own mass graves. They would strangle people. People were decapitated. People were crucified. They were bombed from the air by U.S. helicopters. If you follow this trail of blood, it leads back to Washington. The Reagan administration and other administrations, which were sponsoring the Guatemalan army and Rios Montt and Perez Molina. Perez Molina was later on the payroll of the CIA when he became intelligence chief. It also leads back to CACIF, the Association of the Guatemalan Oligarchy. They are the ones who own and essentially rule Guatemala. They were backing the army during the slaughter. They ran their own civilian death squads, especially going after unionists, peasant organizers. The trail of blood also leads back to foreign and U.S. corporations. AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce. I spoke to leaders of AmCham starting in 1980, and they described how they would call in the Guatemalan National Police and Army to have their workers murdered when they tried to organize unions.
And Alan, of course, because you have been covering this as a journalist for so long, and since that time, though, I do have to ask, how do you, your information or evidence that he was on the payroll of the CIA, and where does that come from?
From U.S. and Guatemalan intelligence people who worked with them. All of the heads of the GEDOS, the G2 military intelligence, which did assassinations, disappearances, and torture, received payments from the CIA, including other officers, for example, like General Ortega Menaldo.
So, Alan, how does that, and knowing that history, how does that then inform the protests that we are seeing today? Because the stream has covered the Rios Montt case in the past. We did a show on it in 2013 when it was Guatemala noted as being the first time that they're actually trying a former leader in court in their own court system. Clearly, it was historic. What does that mean for today?
That trial was
Alan,
a breakthrough
I agree
world historic achievement for Guatemala.
I agree with what Alan was saying, but I think that in the present, people are not requesting the president to leave because of the past of his participation in the gross human rights violations. That is what the problem that we are facing as a society, that still there is a group within our society that defend those who committed gross human rights violations, including the president of Guatemala, Otto Perez. But the discussion at the present goes around specifically about the case of La Línea corruption case and also the lack of independence of the judiciary. And once we bring this discussion to other fields, I think then we will start looking again at a divided society, because the society is not totally united in cases like gross human rights violations and the need to bring these people to justice and the genocide case. There is still a gross distance between, for example, the private sector and the civil society and the victims.
Yeah, but we have.
So right now, I think that the issue is not the discussion about gross human rights violations committed in the past.
You know, Malika, on the question you raised earlier about how much support is there left for the president, we asked our community what the president should do, and I had an avalanche of tweets that have come in, all with the same view. We have Care over here who says he should quit and pay for his crimes against our country. We want justice. And we have Maria over here who says he should resign immediately and allow the district attorney office and criminal courts to investigate him. Andrea, you're on the streets. Do you run into anybody who opposes your particular view that still needs convincing?
Excuse me, can you repeat the question?
The question is for Andrea. We'll get to you in just a minute, Ramon. Andrea, go ahead.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, on the streets, there are a lot of protests. No, it's just against corruption. There has been always impunity against Mayan communities that are defending their territory. So you can see a lot of signs. You can see a sign when someone is asking Otto Perez Molina resignation. Also, there's the Mayan communities asking and demanding respect for their human rights. And they're blaming Otto Perez Molina for the massacres during the war, and also blaming him for the recent massacres that he committed since he gets as president of Guatemala in 2012. My community itself was attacked by the military government of Otto Perez Molina in 2012, and now the indigenous government for my community, the 48 cantones of Totonicapan, has come 2,000 kilometers away to march here in Guatemala City today to ask Otto Perez Molina resignation, and also to end the impunity and justice, ask for justice for Mayan communities. So you can see so much different people asking different stuff, and this is inspiring because that means for us that our struggle is not just done with anger, it's done with hope that something can change for Guatemala, especially for the youth. We can see how a lot of youth people is marching on the streets, singing songs, trying to make different and pacific protests that can show that it's not necessary to get into the war again to fight to have a different country.
So Arturo, you heard Andreas talk about how indigenous communities and non-indigenous communities now, for one of the first times perhaps, are gathering to fight for the same cause. Are we seeing an erasure of divides for the first time? And what is it about this case in particular that might be calling for that?
Right. I think that Guatemala has been a very deeply divided society, and the the grievances of many have not been taken fully into account by other sectors of society that have not been directly affected by the repression of the past and by the social circumstances in which the majority lives. So I think that these protests that are taking place right now in Guatemala are opening an opportunity for people in the urban centers to take into consideration, to get to know what has really happened throughout the country, because many times they have not been able to access the information, or they have been kept away from knowing really what the history of our country has been. So I really think it is very remarkable that the urban part of the country and the rural part of the country are protesting together right now. And as Andrea points out, the participation of young people has really given totally another character to these protests. They did not live directly through the times of the worst repression, and they have another point of view, and they want to meet other sectors of society. And a very good example of what is going on is the different universities in the country, very divided ideologically amongst themselves. They're coming together, at least the students are, and they're protesting together at this time.
Right, and at the heart of all this, of course, is this corruption scandal. So I want to allow our audience to get a taste of what really is at the heart of this. I want you to first take a look at this tweet. This is from the body investigating this scandal, and this just kind of shows the tangled weave that has been weaved, really, of La Linea, or the line case, as it's being called. And at the very top of that, you can see kind of all the faces implicated in this. At the very top of it is the president and his now former vice president, who stepped down and is now facing that investigation. But the body that is doing this investigation, that's what I want to focus on now. And that is a UN-backed body of international prosecutors who've come together under the name CICIG. It's the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala. You can see it was created in 2007 there. It's independent and it works alongside the Attorney General's office. Ramon, thinking of this body, is this the first time that we have seen an independent investigation, really, looking into claims of this sort? And does that set a precedent?
Definitely, yes, it is the first time. I think that without the presence of CICIG, that would not have been possible to investigate the vice president. Or investigate other people with a lot of economical or political or military power. Let me just put you an example. As a background of this case, in the 90s, late 90s, the case Alfredo Moreno, it was the same structure, but with another name, and the only one who could be brought into trial was this person, Alfredo Moreno, who was then sentenced to a short period of jail. But the thing was that at that time it was not possible to fight the structure itself. So this structure, this criminal structure, is operating since the early 2000s. And at that time, you can trace what role some of our judges now played. For example, Carol Patricia Flores, we know her as a judge of impunity in the genocide case, and she was at that time judge for the Alfredo Moreno Salvavidas structure. Now the magistrate of the Constitutional Court, Héctor Hugo Perez Aguilera, he was also at the Attorney General's office, and he was involved in this case. At that time, the structure remained exactly the same. It was not affected. The only one affected was Alfredo Moreno, who was a servant of the structure. So I think that the presence of CICIG has helped and supported to investigate these kind of cases, and mainly to bring into jail and to process people with a lot of power that have never been brought into process.
Right.
Those with, as we call, of cuello blanco, white nail, because they have power, political power, military power, or economical power.
White collar.
So
Arturo piped in there for the rest of us non-Spanish speakers. White collar. Thank you for that, Ramon.
So we have people also online who are commenting about this specific investigation. We have Mikhail over here who says, all people knew that the politicians were corrupt, but the public prosecutor and this commission showed with evidence and faced them with their actions. Goes on to say, accountability has certainly increased thanks to their efforts, but I ain't celebrating until I hear some guilty. Alan, what do you think are the odds of people actually being found guilty and serving lengthy sentences for this scandal?
Well, it's a good question, because that opens up the main question, and that is, how far will this go? The Mayan survivors of the massacres have been pushing for decades for justice. But now, because the system is shaking, because the urban working class and middle class has finally come into the streets, this is a brief moment. It may only last days, it may only last weeks, where basic change is possible. CACIF, the oligarchs, and the US are desperately trying to stop this movement. They're trying to co-opt it. They're trying to prevent basic change. But it could be done. If people are bold enough, if people are not intimidated by the army, intimidated by the goons of CACIF and the military, they can win something. Guatemala has already set an example for the world. They brought Rios Montt, their former head of state, their former dictator, to trial in a local court. They convicted him of genocide. They gave him 80 years. Imagine if the U.S. could do that. Imagine if in the U.S. we could bring George W. Bush to trial for Iraq, or bring President Obama to trial for the civilians he's killed with his drones. It's still inconceivable here. Guatemala has achieved a higher level of civilization than the U.S., and they have a chance to achieve more now if they're able to get to the deepest issues, which are that this is a system based on the mass killing of civilians, and it creates hunger for the people. Guatemala has one of the highest indices of malnutrition in the world. People break their backs working all day long, and they still don't have enough to get enough protein.
And really, you're pointing to the very issues that people are facing, the very real issues that they're facing: poverty, high crime, which is why people could be taken to the streets in addition to this, because that corruption does affect their individual lives. Arturo, I saw you nodding there as Alan was talking, but the question online still is, at the end of the day, then what does this mean for the elections that are coming up? We have this big corruption scandal. We have this investigation. We also have elections coming on September 6th. So I want you first to take a look at this. This is your president, and this is what he had to say in addressing the nation about this. Have a listen.
Les afirmo que no renunciaré y que con toda entereza enfrentaré.
So Arturo, should the elections be postponed? Because clearly your president is saying he is not guilty. He, of course, can't he can't run again in the upcoming elections, but whoever else does take his place might also be implicated as well. Is that not right? So what does this mean for the elections, Arturo?
Right. As it has been said before, the people in Guatemala have always known that this kind of corruption is permanently taking place within government and, of course, with other sectors of society. But the crisis only erupted 20 weeks before the general elections were to take place. And all of this indignation of the people has been struggling to come together, to coalesce into political proposals. And although different parts of society, including the private sector, they have been opening up to try to come together and put forward proposals, it has not been enough time yet for new political initiatives to really take shape as yet. Some people, some sectors have been calling for the postponement of elections. Nevertheless, this idea has not taken up enough support as yet from the wider society. So it seems that the elections will take place. It's only some 10 days away. And unfortunately, the candidates who are participating in the elections, it is a presidential and also.
So Arturo, I'm going to pause you there because we're running out of time. But a simple answer to this question: do you think that they should be postponed?
Sorry?
Do you think that the election should be postponed?
I personally do not think this will happen, and it is too late to ask for it to happen right now. But I do believe that there's a lot of things going on, and that during the next administration...
A lot of things going on that we are going to discuss in our post show. Okay. I'm going to pause you right there, but you gave us a sort of answer on whether or not you think they should be postponed, so we will see. We'll discuss that in the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. I'll see you there. Welcome back. We're discussing the political crisis in Guatemala. We're going to get right back to that conversation. I was asking Arturo whether or not he thinks the elections will be postponed come September 6th, and I know that there's also some thoughts on that from Alan and from Andrea and from our community. So I'm going to go to Omar here for what they had to say.
Yeah, we have Natalia here who tweeted in and basically asking for the elections to be postponed. She says all of the current candidates for the presidency have ties to corruption and illicit money flows. Says Guatemalan people are right to call for the suspension of the current elections. We must look to them to define the path forward. Andrea, what do you expect could possibly happen between now and whenever the elections are delayed to? What could you achieve in between?
Well, I have to say that the major population in Guatemala has now like a big sentence. And we say in these conditions, we do not want elections. And that's why today the country decided to go in this big strike. Not just asking Otto Perez Molina resignation, it's asking also the Supreme Court to suspend the elections, because we do not see any hope or any possibility of change in the country if we keep the same political system, especially the same political party, because all of the candidates have been related with crime structures, with drug structures, or military criminal structures. So we're sick, we're tired, and that's why people took all the streets today. And we hope finally that we can make them change, because there's something really dangerous about also the health of the city, and that we're really glad, but it's also how we lost our sovereignty, our autonomy, because of the international intervention. And in some way, that's dangerous, and we are seeing in some fact that the U.S. Embassy has been interfering a lot and putting pressure to make the elections came in Guatemala. So in that kind of conditions for us, it's really hard, and people, it's really mad.
Right.
So that's why today we are in the streets, and you can read some signs that said, in these conditions, we do not want the elections.
Alan?
And even if they come and do it,
Andrea,
the elections are going to be illegitimate.
Alan?
I think Andrea is exactly right. Each of the rich major party candidates for president is backed either by the most murderous of the military officers who carried out the massacres of the 80s, or by organized crime, and specifically drug syndicates. And that's the only choice among the big major parties on offer. People have been calling for things like...
So that's not much of a choice. So then what are the options?
It's not a choice at all. It's exactly the problem. See, Guatemala faces a very deep challenge now, but I think people are up to it. This could end up with Guatemala being even worse off than it is now. You could get a new president, for example, Baldetti, who's the leader in terms of political polling now, who says he's going to fire the CC special prosecutor. He will gut the attorney general's office. Many of the other candidates might do the same. It could end up worse. Or if people are bold enough, and if the U.S. can be pushed back from interfering and let Guatemalans finally take control of their own lives, essentially for the first time since '54, when the CIA invaded and overthrew a democracy, there could be real progress. You could have a more democratic governmental structure. You could have a system that tries to see that when a person works all day, they at least have enough to feed their kids and send them to school and give them some basic health care. You could have an end to the terror by the army, by the oligarchs. All these things are possible now because this is such a moment of deep crisis, but it could also go in the other direction. So if people want to do something about what is happening in Guatemala now, they can tell the U.S. government to stop propping up Perez Molina, stop backing the Guatemalan military, stop backing CACIF, and they can join in admiration for the courage of the Guatemalan people, especially the indigenous Mayans who've been fighting for decades to bring these criminal officers to justice. And ojalá que that their backers in the U.S. Could also be brought to justice.
And Alan mentioned CACIF, so for our international audience, that is the Coordinating Committee of Agricultural, Commercial, Industrial, and Financial Associations. And what that really means is the business elite of Guatemala. Omar.
So we have some people who are commenting on the role basically of the United States and how it relates to this investigation and external pressure. You have Jonathan over here who says that the International Commission Against the Impunity in Guatemala is a foreign entity created to accomplish some of the attributions that the actual system cannot fulfill. Says it's a UN office, stands for their interests, mostly the US. For now, we have similar goals, but for how long? And then finally, we have Natalia, who tweeted earlier saying the government won't act on the results of this investigation because it has the backing of the US to continue with business as usual. Ramon, what do you make of all this? What do you think of the current U.S. role, and what do you think it should be? Whether international pressure could basically change the outcome of how this investigation goes forward?
Well, the international community, I think they should back the changes. First of all, the delay of the elections. It is impossible to go into an election right now with the situation that we are facing. And I think that they should also request and back the changes in the different laws that we are presenting. The thing is that the international community is not also united about this, because you can see the OAS has backed the elections to be held, and on the other side, the position of the United States has not been clear. I think that the international community should back the delay of the elections, because what we are facing now is the cleansing of the state. And we cannot get into elections with this kind of political parties. It is impossible. So I think that the international community should be much more content, much clear regarding their policy towards Guatemala and request the elections to be delayed.
The cleansing of the state. I had to write that down because that's really a vivid picture you're painting for us. And as you were speaking, Alan was nodding his head yes. So we're running out of time, but I'm going to give you each. I'm going to give you each, Alan. I'm going to give you each, and I will start with you. I'm going to give you each a way to wrap this story up by asking you a question and get your thoughts on it. And I want you to look into your crystal ball, prognosticate for us a bit, predict. We have 2 weeks until this election. In these next 2 weeks, what do you think might happen, Alan?
The Guatemalan structure of terror and exploitation of the poor might be forced to collapse, or at least reform itself deeply. That's if the people can win. Or if Washington and the CACIF oligarchs prevail and the foreign corporations prevail, like the U.S. and Canadian mining companies, then maybe Perez Molina will go, but you'll just have another oligarch or another military man or another narco candidate, and the structure won't change. This usually big change is not possible. These days and weeks in Guatemala are one of those situations where big change is possible. The people in the street can make it happen. History is in their hands now, something which rarely occurs, and we have to support them and oppose the efforts of forces like the U.S. government and CACIF to maintain the status quo of hunger.
History is in their hands, so it's up to the Guatemalan people in Alan's view. I will go to you, Andrea, for your last thoughts on what you think are going to happen in these next 2 weeks.
Well, something is certain, and the struggle will keep going. This just started. The population of Guatemala is really tired about the political and economical system. So today, we just begun a big struggle, and even a longer one. We're not going to allow that elections can be done in this condition. So, especially for me, as a part of an indigenous community, we will fight with our bodies, resisting in the roads and blocking the roads all the days that have taken to avoid the election. So, especially that, this is the call for the people in the audience that hear us in Europe and the United States, not Jazeera, support Guatemala New Spring.
Hey, we definitely will be watching online and on our screens. Ramon, next 2 weeks.
Well, I think that it will depend on what is happening right now and what will happen next week, because there are other demonstrations announced for Tuesday. And it will depend on how many persons and how big the demonstrations are. there is still a possibility of stopping the elections and bringing out of the office the president. So I think that we can do it if we continue demonstrating and we continue claiming the state for the changes that we need.
Arturo, last but not least.
Well, I think that it is remarkable how peaceful the demonstrations have been, and also the fact that the government has restrained from massive repression against the protesters. I think that what is going on right now will eventually probably force the president to resign. And even if the elections are not postponed, I am quite optimistic of this combination of investigative muscle and social mobilization. And I really think that Guatemalan society will come together and propose the cleansing up of its political system in the coming years.
And we will all be watching. Omar?
So we have this closing thought from Ixbalanque, who says, "I'm very proud of being Guatemalan. We're making history, changing the life of our offspring. I'm almost in tears," and tweeted a bunch of pictures along with it of these massive demonstrations that are taking place today. He goes on to say that the president only has one path: to resign, and until he leaves government, the people will not rest, and says, of course, in a peaceful way. And I think that's one thing that everybody will agree on, is we all hope that things will remain peaceful in the country.
And as you read this, our guests all smiled and nodded to themselves, so I hope it remains peaceful. We have run out of time for this fascinating discussion. It will continue online. Use the hashtag AJStream. I want to thank our guests, Andrea Ishu, Alan Nairn, Arturo Matute, and Ramon Candena for joining us today. Until next time, I'll see you online.